Hey guys, welcome to episode 226 of Stand Up and the beginning of season 2 of the podcast. Joining me today, Professor Eric Segall and climate reporter of Heated.World, Emily Atkin. I'm Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now.
What a testament it is to Joe's character that he had the audacity to break one of the most substantial barriers that exists in our country and select a woman as his vice president. But while I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last. Because every little girl watching tonight sees that this is a country of possibilities. And to the children of our country, regardless of your gender, our country has sent you a clear message. Dream with ambition. Lead with conviction. And see yourselves in a way that others may not, simply because they've never seen it before. But know that we will applaud you every step of the way.
That's just a little bit of Kamala Harris from Saturday night when she and Joe Biden came out and gave speeches that were very widely received as good, as excellent, as I read. Somebody said the best ever given in such a moment after a presidential election like that. And that is across the spectrum. A lot of people on the right even saying that. For me, I tweeted in 2016, I told my girls that they were about to witness the first woman become president. It was a mistake to make that prediction. They were crushed. Instead, they watched a man who abuses women become our leader. Tonight, while watching Kamala speak, they were empowered, and now I'm crying again. That's what I tweeted. My wife and I took the girls into New York City, we decided, in the afternoon, and we partied. We drove around the Upper West Side where we used to live, and we knew the neighborhood. We went down to Columbus Circle where Trump International Hotel is, took a picture giving it the finger, and shared that out. And some people thought that was not very classy, and we're not always the classiest family. I'm not going to lie to you, but so maybe we'll just have to agree to disagree. It wasn't my idea, by the way. I'm not sure who did it, but it was my idea to go to New York City, and Val thought that was a great idea. We had a great time. I shared pictures, and we just loved it. We drove in, and my older daughter, Ava, said driving into the neighborhood and seeing people and cheering, it was like such a natural high. It gave me such a hit of dopamine, she told us. Critical of those of us who went outside and celebrated. You know what? That's fair. That's fair because of the virus, obviously. I wasn't going to run onto the field at a football game like they did when Notre Dame beat Clemson the other night without a mask. And we weren't really close to people, for very long periods of time. We always had our masks on while outside, and so did everybody else. But, it's not something that you do every day. It's something that you do once a year, and that was worth the risk. It really was. My wife and I talked all day about how worth it was and how much fun that we had and how we'll never forget that. So that's what we did. I also hung out with a bunch of listeners, subscribers on Zoom before that. Shortly after the election was called, CNN called it at first at 11:24, and then NBC called it 11:25, CBS 11:25, ABC 11:26, AP 11:28, and Fox News finally called it at 11:40. And this was all while Rudy Giuliani was having a press conference at an industrial park at a landscaping company between a dildo shop and a crematorium. And if you haven't heard about that story, it's the greatest story of all time. Rudy Giuliani detailed a strategy to get to the bottom of the election, or whatever he calls it, at the car park of a Four Seasons Total Landscaping company. We think there was a mix-up with the Four Seasons Hotel. This is in Philadelphia. But on Saturday morning, while they were announcing the results of the election and President Trump was playing golf while basically accusing Democrats of stealing the election. There was a big press conference at this place, and everybody is really going nuts over it, as they rightly should. Comedy writer Zach Bornstein tweets, I can write jokes for 800 years and I'd never think of something funnier than Trump booking the Four Seasons for his big press conference, and it turning out to be the Four Seasons total landscaping parking lot between a dildo store and a crematorium. Anyone else can't sleep because they're just lying on their side in the dark thinking about the Four Seasons total landscaping. And finally, I also truly love the idea of a small landscaping company getting a call from Rudy Giuliani to book their space, something that a landscaping company does not do, and them just agreeing and not correcting it. Here is that moment, by the way, when the networks were calling it. And what do you think of this?
Because they don't decide the election. The call for Joe Biden isn't. Who was it called by? Oh my goodness. All the networks. Wow. All the networks. We have to forget about the law. Judges don't count. All the networks thought Biden was going to win by 10%. Gee, what happened?
What happened was you were on a bed with your hand down your pants, and we still probably should talk about that a little bit. But he's not wrong, Rudy Giuliani, is he? I mean, it's not legally binding, the networks calling it, but the networks, they have journalists who do math, and they get the vote tallies from the different places across the country that are counting them, and they count them up, and then they make a call. That's how it works. But we get into the legal aspect of how it works with constitutional law scholar Eric Segall in my second interview of today's episode coming up. But the question remains that if Trump voters, or a little less than half of Americans, don't think that Biden won the election or that the election was stolen from him, then how legitimate will they see Joe Biden as president? That's something that we're going to have to deal with and try to combat every day with our friends and family and fellow citizens. Here's a guy who's not helping, televangelist Kenneth Copeland, who is a bizarre, horrible guy. Google him. He's been really destroyed by some pretty good investigative journalists, but he's still a very powerful, influential televangelist. And this is how he handled this. He's laughing at the media for declaring Joe Biden the winner of the election. Here, this clip is going around.
The media said what?
He keeps doing this.
The media said Joe Biden's president.
He does this for like another 40 seconds. And everybody just starts joining in. He's Kenneth Copeland. He's an absolute madman. But I had to play that for you because, I think we're going to see more of that from a lot of it. And I suppose you could say, well, a lot of liberals and Trump haters or Hillary supporters, or most people thought that the 2016, the election was stolen, or the 2000 election was stolen. And, we can argue about that for a long time. Did they suppress the vote? Russian interference? How much did the James Comey letter matter? But the bottom line is millions and millions of Americans voted for Donald Trump. And even though it wasn't the majority because we had this stupid system, he became the president and we basically accepted that. And then we impeached him, and it still didn't matter. You know what else didn't matter? Coronavirus. Apparently, where coronavirus was the worst, he did the best. That is a very, very difficult idea to wrap your head around. And I'm sure a lot of journalists and other experts are going to try to figure that out in the weeks and months to come, how that could be the case. Oh, sorry. That's still playing. Okay, Kenneth Copeland. Look him up, honestly. Look up his interview with, just look up Kenneth Copeland Inside Edition, and you can thank me later. What a fraud. All right, you know who isn't a fraud, though, is Dave Chappelle. He's a very controversial comedian. I've met Dave several times back in the old days, and he was hosting Saturday Night Live on Saturday night. Always controversial, always says things that are offensive, almost always, but makes some pretty good points, too. And in the final part of his monologue, he said something I thought was pretty profound I wanted to share with all of you.
I would implore everybody who's celebrating the day to remember, it's good to be a humble winner. Remember when I was here 4 years ago? Remember how bad that felt? Remember that half the country right now still feels that way. Please remember that. Remember that for the first time in the history of America, the life expectancy of white people is dropping because of heroin, because of suicide. All these white people out there that feel that anguish, that pain, that mad because they think nobody cares. And maybe they don't. Let me tell you something. I know how that feels. I promise you, I know how that feels. If you're a police officer, and every time you put your uniform on, you feel like you got a target on your back. You're appalled by the ingratitude that people have when you would risk your life to save them. Oh, man, believe me. Believe me. I know how that feels. Everyone knows how that feels. But here's the difference between me and you. You guys hate each other for that. And I don't hate anybody. I just hate that feeling. That's what I fight through. That's what I suggest you fight through. You gotta find a way to live your life. You gotta find a way to forgive each other. You gotta find a way to find joy in your existence in spite of that feeling. And if you can't do that, come get these nigga lessons. Thank you very much, and good night.
The Foo Fighters are here. Stick around. We'll be right back. He forgot to say that. Won't get the N-word lessons thing. If you didn't hear the first part of it, I'm not going to explain it. I highly recommend you go watch the entire thing. Always challenges you to think. Always says something that pisses me off, offends me, but really one of my all-time favorites in terms of comedy and thinkers. Dave Chappelle on Saturday Night Live. All right, moving on. America lost another legend at the age of 80. We lost what can only be, I think, referred to as a universally beloved guy, Alex Trebek. Millions of Americans watched him on Jeopardy for decades. I grew up watching Jeopardy. I used to watch it on the phone with a friend of mine and playing along now. How my daughters actually do that, but old school. He's considered one of the best game show hosts of all time for lots of different reasons, lots of news coming in and tributes flooding into those who knew him, those who grew up watching him, remembering what kind of a guy he was and how funny he could be at times. And there's all kinds of clips out there about of Alex Trebek going around. And I wanted to play a couple of them for you right now. Tyler Conway cites this as, he writes, forever the funniest Alex Trebek moment. And I was like, there's no way the clip is going to live up to how this guy describes it. The funniest of all time? Well, I'm going to hype it up as well. Here it is.
Susan Cole is from Bowie, Maryland, and her favorite type of music is something I've never heard of, but it doesn't sound like fun.
I think it's very fun. It's called nerdcore hip-hop. It's
nerdcore
hip-hop, yes. It's people who identify as nerdy, rapping about the things they love, video games, science fiction, having a hard time meeting romantic partners, you know. It's really catchy and fun.
Losers, in other words.
Well,
yeah, I hate that word, losers. I really think it's a bad and mean word, but that was comedy brilliance. Trebek. And I also saw several people sharing this clip.
The new champion, 20,400 for Bert Thacker.
Bert
Any
Thacker.
family members back home cheering you on?
You know, here's a true story, man. I learned English because of you. And so my grandfather, who raised me, I'm going to get tears right now. I used to sit on his lap and watch you every day. So it's a pretty special moment for me, man. Thank you very much.
Bert Thacker is that guy's name. I thought that was also a really poignant clip to share with you. All right, one more. And lastly, I love this exchange that he had with Jane Pauley back in May 2019. He was on CBS Sunday Morning after he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And I just thought this was a really poignant, thoughtful exchange, his ability to keep his sense of humor in the face of a terminal illness is really inspiring. Listen to him tell Jane Pauley about the moment his doctor told him his diagnosis.
And after it was over, he came to me and he said, Alex, you were right. There was a bulge in your stomach the size of a small fist. So, and that was the beginning of it all.
There's nothing about that story that is good. But then when they say pancreatic, that had to be...
That caught my attention.
That's a big fist.
Yeah, that's, I know about pancreatic cancer. And I said, oh, I cursed a little.
And then the big one was stage 4.
Well, that just means it's spread to other places. So it sounds impressive. I've got stage 4 cancer. Okay, not stage 1 for sissies. That's just beginner's cancer. I've got advanced.
Why are you making me laugh about it?
Well, what else are we going to do?
What else are we going to do? I just thought that was unbelievable right there, and a special moment, and I wanted to share it with you. All right, one more clip I wanted to share with you. A lot of people, including Eric Segall, giving credit to Stacey Abrams in Georgia for working so hard to organize voters there, inspire voters, lead voters in Georgia to help win Georgia. And here is Stacey Abrams now calling for everybody to support her to help elect these 2 Democratic senators in Georgia, Reverend Warnock and Jon Ossoff. Here is Stacey Abrams.
Hello, and thank you to the grassroots activists, the allied organizations, volunteers, and of course, all of you voters for your efforts over the years to create this new Georgia. I am so grateful for your contributions in making Georgia a pivotal battleground state. Vice President Biden now leads in the race for Georgia's 16 electoral college votes. Without your faith, this would not have been imaginable. And without your hard work, this would not have been possible. As we continue to make sure that every vote is counted and every voice is heard, our work is not done. In Georgia, we have 2 Senate runoff elections on January 5th. My friends Jon Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock are on the ballot, and control of the United States Senate will likely come down to these 2 races. That means access to health care and access to justice are still on the line. Please go to gasenate.com and join our efforts to elect Jon Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock to the United States Senate. That's gasenate.com. We have seen what's possible when we work hard and when we work together. We know we can win Georgia. Now let's get it done. Again.
Yeah, we are going to have to win Georgia, so check that out, gasenate.com. All right, I've got to get to my guests now, but I do want to say thank you to everybody that is supporting me with a paid subscription. If you haven't signed up yet, please do. More and more folks listening every day. Got some really exciting announcements to make, a partnership deal with an awesome organization that I'll announce later this week that I'm super excited about. But as I said at the very top, this is the official beginning of season 2 of the podcast. What delineates season 1 from 2? Well, I've been doing it for a year. I think the presidential election, and now it's time to pivot and time to change a little bit and time to evolve the podcast more and adding new elements, launching the new website, bringing on all kinds of different points of view, talking to more listeners individually, taping those conversations, having several guests on at a time, panels, and digging into a whole bunch of issues that aren't just related, obviously, to Donald Trump, because hopefully we won't have to be talking about him nearly as much. But we'll talk about parenting and the future of energy and so many other issues that I want to discuss with you. And I want to learn so much more. That's what this podcast is about. I love to ask questions to super smart people. I love building this community, hearing from and communicating with you. So sign up for a paid subscription right now. This is the official launch of season 2 of Stand Up with Pete Dominick, episode 226, the day after the election, we'll call it. Really, it's a few days after the election, like basically a week after the election. And how will Donald Trump leave if he ever leaves? Is he going to stay and hide somewhere in the White House It's anybody's best guess. I'll bring on all kinds of smart people to talk about the future of the Democratic Party and the progressive movement, the future of the conservative movement, and the future of everything else that we're going to have to deal with, specifically and most importantly and most urgently, this pandemic where America is setting yet again records. Today, Joe Biden is making an announcement of who his COVID task force is going to be. I think that's going to be really important, and hopefully we'll be able to get a handle of this in the upcoming year. So let me now get to my first guest. I thought it would be really interesting to talk with Professor Eric Segall about the election, about the results, about the courts, and what they may or may not decide. Of course, Donald Trump's team has been suing in several different states, I think up to 12 lawsuits. All of them have been tossed out. I think he's 0 for 12 at this point. He's got no evidence of the claims he's making. But just be aware of this, because a lot of these things have been debunked. These videos you've seen, these arguments that have been made, there are always irregularities in elections. You can always find ballots here and there, irregularities here and there, even sometimes illegal activity. But the question should be, is it enough to affect the outcome in any state? And the answer to that right now is we see no evidence of that. You have to present evidence of that. And so far, there isn't any. I don't think there will be any. I don't think there's any reason to believe that there is any. And the Trump campaign and administration is just going to keep on digging while we hear reports that Jared Kushner is trying to convince him to concede. His wife is apparently trying to convince him to concede while publicly tweeting to keep fighting. Who the hell knows what that woman thinks, if she has any principles at all whatsoever. So we will see, and I'll be on it each and every day on this podcast. So sign up now to support it, because while it is free, it is not cheap. I need your support here at Season 2. Lots of new subscribers in the past week. I'll give shout outs tomorrow to all the new subscribers that I want to welcome you to joining, and we'll have a Zoom hangout this week as well. Maybe Wednesday night, I'm thinking right now, temporarily. I'll make the official announcement on Patreon at patreon.com/PeteDominic. If you're a subscriber for as little as $5, you can join us there, and we'll talk about the results and where we go from here and what you'd like to hear on this podcast. So coming up, Emily Atkin of Heated.world. I wanted to talk with her today for sure, because climate, I think, is the most important issue. We've got to figure out the pandemic, obviously the economy, racism and sexism, and so many other issues. But I wanted to talk with Emily, and we've been texting, and I said, can you talk on Sunday? She could. And so I got her on this episode, the Monday show. Emily Atkin of Heated.world, climate reporter. We had an awesome discussion. That is coming up. But first, he is a constitutional law scholar at Georgia State University. He's the author of Supreme Myths and Originalism as Faith, and one of the all-time favorites right here on Stand Up. Ladies and gentlemen, the Legal Eagle on Twitter at eSpinSeagal. Listen to his podcast as well. Just look it up wherever fine podcasts exist. Here's my conversation with Eric Segall. Okay, joining me now is, as said, Professor Eric Segall. It is Sunday afternoon, the day after the networks called the election. Segall, as always, thank you very much for your time, first and foremost. And second of all, I guess it doesn't matter if the networks called it for Biden, does it, really?
Well, no, it does matter in the sense that they have a lot of information and their data is probably pretty good. And if they think Biden is going to win at the end of the day, that's an interesting and probably correct prediction. It has no legal effect. None. Zero.
Let me rephrase my question. Of course, it matters for all kinds of reasons in terms of how the public interprets news. But legally, the networks don't. Who does?
Well, let me just remind people who are watching this, or tell people for the first time who are watching this.
Or listening to this, because it's probably mostly going to be listened to. I mean, you do look good on camera, and I do as well. The sun's shining down on me. It's a nice Sunday afternoon.
You do look a little angelic today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That's nice of you.
So, Dewey won the election according to all the newspapers, and then people woke up the next day and Truman was the president. It doesn't matter what the media says at the end of the day. It matters what Congress says the first week of July when they certify the Electoral College. And I say that because there have been moments in American history, Bush versus Gore is one. There's an election in the 19th century also, where that moment in time came where the Congress had to certify the Electoral College votes, not Bush versus Gore so much, but the other one. And it was unclear who won. And I don't think that's going to happen this year. I would say I'm 90% sure that President-elect Biden is going to be the president of the United States. He's not the president until Congress certifies. He's not the president-elect even until Congress certifies the vote. President-elect is a term the media uses. It has no legal significance.
What is the process by which the Constitution says Congress certifies the vote? And what about the concern that reporters like Barton Gellman raised at the Atlantic magazine and others now are calling for on the right, including people like Mark Levin, that Republican states should call the election for Trump despite how the public people actually in those states voted? How does it work?
You know, it's Sunday afternoon. It is 1-ish. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Georgia. It looks like Biden's going to win the election. And you bring up Mark Levin.
Hate him.
Just the scum of the earth.
Absolutely. And also one of the most influential people in America. Second only, maybe, or third, somewhere in the top 10, at least, in terms of media. And they matter. Yeah. Sean Hannity, of course, is the most.
No, I talked about him in my book because he wrote a book on the Supreme Court that was on all the bestseller lists. Mark Levin, the not great one, in fact, the opposite of great one, but he calls himself the great one. He tweeted, I believe it was Friday. If it was Saturday, I apologize. But sometime in the last 48 hours, he tweeted that Republican legislatures should not certify electors pursuant to the votes of their people in their state. And instead, what they should do is have the legislature certify Donald Trump as the winner of the election. Now, here's the background. The Constitution, this is going to blow people away. If you're listening and you're driving, pull over, because this is going to blow you away. You, driver, listener, bathtubber, wherever you are.
A lot of people listening to the top. A lot of people
have no right to vote in a presidential election. The only right you have to vote in a presidential election is because state laws give you those rights. The Constitution does not. So if, for example, and this I could see happen, if, for example, the state of Georgia decided that from now on, the legislature is going to pick the electors, not the people who vote in Georgia, then the Georgia legislature can do that, and there is nothing anybody can do about it except riot in the streets or vote in new people. Now, the reason Mark Levin, the terrible one, the reason his tweet and his position is so horrific is almost all law professors would agree, even conservative ones, that you can't do that retroactively. You can do it before the election. In February of this year, state legislatures could have decided, you know what, the hell with voting, we're going to name the electors who get to pick the president, and that's constitutional. What would be unconstitutional, in my opinion, and I think almost nothing is unconstitutional, but what the great weight of legal authority is, including conservative law professors that I've read their work, is you can't do that retroactively. You can't have two bites of the apple.
Wow.
What?
That's interesting. I didn't read that Barton Gellman story. I didn't want to do it because I didn't think it was likely. And I was like, I just don't want to live that nightmare. But I don't know. And I don't know if he covered that. I'm sure he probably did. But that's
by the way, not only do we have no right to vote in a presidential election, Georgia tomorrow could end all voting for Georgia officials. And there is nothing the federal government could do about it unless the Supreme Court stepped in.
The United States Constitution nowhere grants the right to a citizen for a citizen to vote.
No, president. What it says is the vote cannot be denied on the basis of race and gender or age under 18, excuse me, or over 18. So the federal constitutional rules are the following. States have to let 18-year-olds vote if they have a vote. They can't discriminate on the basis of gender if they have a vote, and they can't discriminate on the basis of race if they have a vote. They don't have to have a vote. Now, let me just be clear. Article 4 of the Constitution says that this is a quote, United States shall guarantee to each state a Republican form of government. Republican meaning the Republican theory, not the Republican Party.
Right.
The Supreme Court has held every single time it has looked at that provision, and that's like 10 times, that it will not enforce that provision. That is not a provision the courts can enforce. The right to vote is in state elections or the presidential election is not in the Constitution. It's an amazing thing.
Wow. Okay. I did not know that. And if you've said that or written it, I am sorry. I don't remember things that are told me.
Most people don't know that, Pete.
Huh. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Crazy.
So the question is, the Trump campaign, I guess the campaign is suing in a number of different states. My understanding is they are 0 for 9 and that they don't have any evidence of the claims that they are making, I guess mostly about some type of voter fraud in some way or another. What do you and other scholars that you respect and are experts on this kind of thing think is going to be the outcome of these lawsuits?
First of all, making claims of voter fraud in the media with no evidence, as everybody has pointed out, is incredibly irresponsible. It's anti-democracy. It's anti-everything. Leaving that aside.
And there's a lot of people making those claims. Trump on Twitter and in commentary, and obviously many people on the right, and including, unfortunately, a number of senators, Republican senators and congressmen.
So, Pete, you know what we should do here? And you can, I guess, always edit this out if you don't like it. Let me make the strongest argument I can for the other side.
Yeah, okay, I like that. I like that. Go for it.
Yeah, so
and you're hired, by the way. You're hired.
But let's be clear.
Segall?
Let's be clear. I don't believe I'm making their argument. Okay, I want to be clear about that. So eventually, I suspect Trump's lawyers will go to court and say we were in the middle of a pandemic. States were, in chaos, which is fair, right?
Yeah.
We didn't really know how to have an election where we're afraid of voting in person, or at least half of the country is afraid of voting in person. And therefore, we had absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, drop-off ballots, drive-through ballots in a way we've never, ever had before.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we did that was ineffective, inefficient, and whether it was intentionally fraudulent or not, created a whole lot of errors and mistakes that we have to make sure we understand before we certify who is the next president of the United States. And since local politicians seem unwilling to do that, we have no choice but to turn to judges to make sure that the correct result was reached by the networks, which, of course, is unofficial and doesn't count. I think that's the strongest argument they can make. Not that there was intentional fraud, but that we had an election that really got screwed up badly and doesn't reflect the accuracy of what was going on.
Okay, so that's an interesting case to make, but I mean, what would
hold on?
Oh,
if they make that case that way, I'm 80 to 90 to 95% sure judges are going to say, "Look, they did the best they can. It's not our job. Go away."
Right.
You never know, Pete, with judging. Look, did you ever think? Let me ask you this question: If I had said to you, the history of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, ratified in 1868 after the Civil War, were obviously all about ending slavery, the 13th, 15th, making the right to vote not contingent upon your race, and then the 14th, protecting the rights of the newly freed slaves, and written in a very general way, but it was all about getting the African-American slaves back into society in a peaceful and reasonable way, which meant the North had to go to the South for a few years and, rule over the South because the South didn't want to give didn't want to give black people equal rights. And then I said to you in 2014, a majority of the Supreme Court would hold that Congress is not allowed to treat Southern states differently than other states when it comes to racial discrimination in voting after a century of racial discrimination in voting. And they claim that principle is part of the Reconstruction Amendments. You would say to me, that's insane. No judge could ever say that. The whole point of those three amendments was to make sure that people of color would be treated with equality, and civil equality and political equality.
I mean, I don't know if I would say that, because the case that you made built so long before the comma to the final question of what I would say. I wasn't sure exactly what we were discussing, but I'm not sure that I would also make that comparison that the courts would, that you would compare those decisions on what we're talking about in terms of certifying the election.
No, what I'm saying is the point I was trying to make. The Supreme Court has issued numerous important constitutional law holdings that are more frivolous than would be a holding, with the proper evidence. This election really was unique. It really was very hard to pull out. People in Pennsylvania are pulling their hair out how to do it well.
Well, this is why I appreciate you. I appreciate that you try so hard, honestly, to understand the argument that would be made on all sides in this case on a legal decision like this one about an election. I do. But I don't know that you made a great case in the end, simply because you're saying if there was a reason. The bottom line is, if the argument is, hey, these were unprecedented times, we didn't do a very good job, well, then they would have to have evidence for that. And there doesn't seem to be, that I've heard, that there are always irregularities, but I think it was a smashing success in terms of the circumstances and how quickly everybody pulled together and volunteers and people worked. And I don't know. I mean, they can't make that case, it would seem, to a court, to a judge.
So I want to be 100% clear. I think Biden will be the next president. I think courts would absolutely not undo anything that's been done, absent clear evidence of what we're talking about, which I don't think exists. And, Pete, the court has done less legally justifiable things. In fact, they did a less legally justifiable thing, not as important, last term in an incredibly important religion case. In fact, just this week, the week of the election, I want you to think about this. The week of the election. Yeah. I'm sorry to bring this up, Pete, but if we're talking about courts, you have to understand it's politics, not law. Last week, a case was argued in the Supreme Court. You're the city of Philadelphia. You want your kids to go into foster homes. You get public interest groups like churches and other organizations to help you place kids in foster homes. They sign a contract. You give them a ton of money. You say, if you don't have to do this, but if you want to take part in this program, you can't discriminate on the basis of race, et cetera, sexual orientation.
Kids can be placed with gay couples. You can't.
A Catholic organization says we will not help you place kids with gay couples.
Fine.
Philadelphia says, okay, that's your prerogative.
Right.
But then you can't participate in our program.
Right.
Does anyone out there think the city of Philadelphia is acting illegally when they say, here's money, taxpayer money, to help our kids, and if you want our money, you have to promise not to discriminate, and the court's going to rule for the Catholics.
Right.
So don't tell me the court won't do crazy and ridiculous things.
You said the court is going to rule for the Catholics?
Yes.
The court has not ruled for the Catholics, though.
I heard the argument last week, they're going to rule for the Catholics.
Okay, let's go back to the election. I think that you always are great at giving examples of other court cases to make the point that you're trying to make here in terms of what the outcome could be. You've made that point well. However, I still am not convinced, because this is an election.
Okay,
and until you give me an example where a court makes the most frivolous case on an election, and not only one state. So he has to you'll correct me here, but he has to convince a number of states in court that this happened in enough states to affect the outcome of the election.
So hold on. First of all, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I am telling you the argument they're going to make. And
fair enough. I'm using the wrong pronouns. Yes. But I appreciate it.
And then I'm saying, I think it'll lose. I think it's wrong.
Right. Okay.
And then I'm saying Bush versus Gore was not much worse than this.
Bush versus Gore, however, was just about one state.
The legal ruling. I mean, the legal ruling.
Okay, but just to help us understand what to expect in the next however many weeks, is there any way you can see a court, and does it have to be a number of courts because of how many states he would have to overturn the outcome?
Only one court matters.
The Supreme Court would overturn the outcome of the...
No, highly unlikely. But possible.
Based on what hypothetical argument or evidence that...
So leaving aside the politics of one state versus 49, the equal protection argument that actually 7 justices accepted in Bush versus Gore. 2 of those wanted the recount to continue, stop the election, gave it to Bush. But the legal equal protection argument in that case was, I'm oversimplifying, but was effectively Florida are using different procedures to count ballots, and that's a constitutional problem. When they ruled that, Pete, in virtually every state, big state, different parts of states counted ballots differently. It was a completely, and to this day, I think different parts of different states probably count ballots differently. So what I'm telling you is let's move away from law.
Okay.
Matter. As far as politics go, no, I don't think there's, and even on a sound legal argument, which this isn't, I don't think the Supreme Court would hand the election to Donald Trump under any circumstances. However, if that were to happen, what I would say to you is, I'm not shocked. I'm surprised, but I'm not shocked.
All right, so let's move on then to another big question about. So that was the question we've been trying to answer is it over? Basically, how does it end?
It's not over. That's a different question. It's not over.
Okay, why is it not over?
Okay,
I mean, I thought we answered the question. It's not over by saying just because the networks say it's not over. Right. It's the courts, and then we discussed that. So what did we not? Well,
let me ask you this. Yeah. Let me ask you a hypothetical question because I'm a constitutional law professor.
All right. Well, I'm usually the one who asks the questions here.
Too bad. Tough. What if? And just bear with me. What if Trump called to the White House the governor, the governors of Republican states and the leading legislators in Republican states, and said, you know what, this has been a fraud. This has been a fake. Because the governor of North Dakota this morning said he's not. He's raising all kinds of fraudulent issues. What if Trump did that and got all of them or most of them to agree this was a sham? This was a fake. I really won the election. Mm-hmm. Do not accept the results of this election. Yeah. And go back to your home states and get the.
There's not a shred of my self that thinks that they'd even get on an airplane to go meet with him. I don't think they go. I don't think the people in the White House make the arrangements. I think his own family right now is begging him or trying to convince him he must give up, concede, and he's going to find a way out of he's going to do it in a horrible way. But
as is usually the case, not always, as is usually the case, you're optimistic, which is good. You have a bright soul. I like that about you.
It's a very kind way of saying I'm a naive little prick.
No, I think you're almost certainly right.
No.
I will breathe better when he is back in his gold-plated bathroom.
It's not going to be in New York because we won't have him.
I hope not. So, Pete, honestly, though, Americans have very short memories, partly because although we have the oldest constitution in the world.
If they have memories at all, most Americans never even learned whatever thing you're about to tell us about.
Even though we have the oldest existing constitution in the world, as a civilization, we're very young, right? Very young compared to, okay. We have, especially compared to, I think, Far East countries. Okay. So we have very short memories. We have had not smooth transitions of power before. Not in time of Bush versus Gore, just not that recently. It can happen, Pete. And Trump, and here's the thing about Trump. So your friend and my friend, Aaron Carroll, I don't know if he coined the phrase or not, but he certainly made it popular on Twitter. Do you think, I say this seriously, please don't make fun of me for asking you this question. Do you think Trump has a bottom? Is there something he would not do in his own self-interest?
No, I don't. Not at all. I think.
You think he's out of options?
No, I think the difference is he always has people who will help him do it.
Okay, let me ask you this
always
question.
Has a Michael Cohen, a son, a daughter, and I'm thinking that he is not going to find people.
Have you seen Bill Barr recently?
Who are capable? Yeah, no. Did he do something today?
No, as far as I know, I don't know this. What someone who knows stuff about this said to me yesterday was he's made one public appearance like in 2 or 3 weeks. And that was to go outside his house and talk to some protesters or something. He has been in hiding. Now, Why is Bill Barr completely in hiding? Maybe he wants to distance himself from Trump immediately.
Probably had the coronavirus.
Or he might have the virus, all kinds of reasons. Pete, listen to me. Would you rather go from today, from 1:40 on this Sunday until January, I forget if it's 5th or 6th, I apologize, but until when Congress certifies the election? Oh, actually, let's talk January 20th. Would you rather go from today into January 20th when the inauguration happens, when Biden gets sworn in by the Chief Justice, as, we're going to win, no problem? Or would you rather go from now into then saying we need to remain vigilant because the person who is currently in the White House not only built for a huge wall around himself, but is capable of virtually any decision that is in his interest?
No, of course, we always remain vigilant as long as he's anywhere close to power. But we're having a conversation about possible scenarios and how they would go down, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at that. So laying it out. The idea that you're going to go away on vacation and knowing that everything's fine, I don't think anybody really thinks that. I think as long as he is close to power, we are closely watching what he does.
I think we have to closely watch how he leaves, what he does as he leaves.
Yeah, sets everything on fire on the way out.
And make sure he, in fact, does leave.
So
hold on, Pete. Hold on. My kids are being really loud right outside my door.
I will tell you if I can hear them, and I cannot.
Then never mind. Then
so,
you know what?
More concerned about the birds outside my window on this lovely Sunday afternoon. My wife, who's screaming in Italian.
I feel like I do not want to be misunderstood, so I wanted to make a statement.
Sure.
Okay. I'm a gambler. I go to Vegas once a year. You know that. I play poker. There's no question that if I'm betting, I'm betting a lot of money that on January 20th, Joe Biden will be the president of the United States. Pete, was at a poker table. I tweeted this the other day at 3:00 in the morning at Borgata in Atlantic City when a royal flush beat 4 aces. The person who held the 4 aces was 99.6% sure or something he was going to win. He didn't. The Falcons were up 28-3 in the third quarter.
Yeah, I think that this kind of analysis is nonsensical.
It's not nonsensical.
Thinking of politics in a way and comparing it to gambling and the percentages there, I don't, because this is human nature. It's not probabilities.
Well,
you are the guy to talk to about how things. One of the people that we could talk to about how things play out in the courts. So for you to even pivot to percentages as to, I just don't.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying something different. So when in the run up to the election of 2016, you and I had a lot of conversations about Cruz and Trump and everything. And in one of those conversations, I remember saying to you, and we can roll the tape if we can find it. I wasn't sure who I hated more, Ted Cruz or Donald Trump. Yeah. It was a close call.
Wow.
And I say, of course, Cruz is much smarter. Trump is much, dumber. Other than that, I'm not really sure. And then I said to you, but there's one difference, and it's the Nixon difference. In my heart, I believe Ted Cruz is a politician who plays by dirty politician rules. The worst of rules, but he's still a politician, and he works for the government, and he has that mindset. What I said to you was Donald Trump would be the first American president ever to have never served in the military or worked in the government. And I said, that scares me more than anything. I think that's why I hate Trump more, by a little bit, because he has no respect. I do believe Ted Cruz has some modicum
of respect.
Point? My point is Trump doesn't care about the United States in any way, shape, or form, in any way that any politician ever does.
Says what about his departure?
It says, I'm sure he does not care whether what he does is legal or not, or breaks norms or not.
Yes, but my point is
I want him to be gone. My only point is I want him out, and then I'll be happy. That's all.
I think we all feel the same way, and I'm only asking you for the legal scenarios in which that you would be concerned could potentially play out.
The election is one of a kind.
Yep.
It is. There are a lot of places where maybe there were some issues caused by the pandemic, not by any bad faith. That now I'm arguing their side again. That the voting was not reliable. Something about that unreliable. What I'm telling you is, as a political matter, I don't think the Supreme Court will buy that. 90% sure they won't. As a legal matter, Pete, this is I want you to emphasize on this. As a legal matter, I want you to trust me. The argument I just made to you is no less frivolous than many constitutional law arguments the Supreme Court has accepted.
I understand, but you're not what I don't know about law at all is that, and maybe you can cite an example, is this is an election. The judges will need evidence for the claims the lawyers are making. It's data. It's numbers. It's not gay adoption. It's not gender. It's not religion or guns. It's
how about the Voting Rights Act?
That's a tough case to make. That's a tough case to make. That, and I don't know what the argument was, but that somehow these states no longer need to be watched.
That wasn't the argument. That was his policy argument.
What was the evidence of numbers? I mean, in this case, we have the outcome of several elections in several states that they will need evidence for. And I'm sure there have been frivolous arguments made at the court. I am just wondering if there are examples
accepted by the court. What John Roberts did in the Voting Rights Act at a broad level of generality, Pete, was he recasted the issue in the case in a infamously dishonest way. So he didn't make it about that. He made it about a dishonest question, because there were, in fact, 21,000 pages of testimony and 15 days of hearings showing that the states that had been covered by the Voting Rights Act prior to that case had amazing racial discrimination all over them. And that data was there. And Roberts spent 3 sentences on that data. And what he said was the data is irrelevant, because the question is not, is there voting discrimination in those states? The question is, does the Congress have a strong reason to distinguish those states from other states? A question that should have been irrelevant. My point under the law. My point is, again, if it comes down to data, the court won't even hear it. Courts hate data. They hate numbers. They don't use mathematicians.
I know, but it's the argument has to be made that somehow the vote count. I keep saying things like I know what I'm talking about. I need to ask questions. What would be the data?
Here's what they might say. I don't believe it. It's the argument I'd make for them. If they hired me, I would not accept the job. But obviously, this is the argument a smart lawyer would make. On election night, Trump was up by however many zillions of votes in most of these states, the swing states. And then over the next couple of days, all these mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and drop-in ballots come flooding in. And lo and behold, they're all for Biden. Well, we can say, well, that's because Democrats voted by mail and Republicans voted in person. But the reality is something changed. And we need to figure out why that discrepancy was so great.
What do you mean, what changed? Something changed?
The numbers changed dramatically.
The numbers did not change. The numbers were always the same. They just were counted in a separate order. Next argument.
Were you there, Pete, when they were counted?
Of course. Everybody knows how they're counted. They would have to prove that they weren't.
Right, I hate being in this corner. You want me to tell you Biden is going to win?
No, I'm making the next argument in hopes that you in that corner would be able to follow up with the next, because the next obvious argument would be, no, the numbers never changed. This is just how we counted them as they come in. And as they come in, that's how it works. It's this idea that it's a horse race. A lot of people were analyzing this in the last week. It's not a horse race. It's not that Trump was ahead and Biden caught up. All of the votes were cast on the same day, arguably, or the same couple of days, arguably. Or the Trump votes actually were cast after. So in effect, Biden was ahead if you counted the ones that came in or that were first cast. That's a very easy scenario to see. No one was ahead or behind. It's how the order in which they're counted.
I agree with that 100%.
And in the end, when you count how many apples you have in your bag, doesn't matter at what point how they got there.
Well, I think a lawyer would argue in the past, how did we count apples previously to this election? And they would say we did it this way.
Yeah, and we couldn't do it that way this time. We changed the rules. Everybody agreed to the rules, and we did it. Nobody didn't agree to the rules. They passed them. Legislatures passed them. And in Wisconsin, they tried to prevent.
Well, that's not true. I mean, judges passed them. Not passed them. In some states, judges
ruled upon them.
In some states, it was judges who made the rules. And by the way, Pete, there are 4 Supreme Court justices who have already said that they are this is before Barrett, that they're empathetic to Pennsylvania legislature's argument that the votes that came in under the deadline set by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court should not be counted. 4 judges have already said they would accept that argument.
Well, they're not,
which is why they required those votes to be segregated and counted separately.
Okay, so don't count them. He still doesn't win. And even if he does, it's just Pennsylvania and Biden's still the president.
So I'll tell you what this is like. I will tell you what this is like. I think most constitutional law professors have the experience I'm about to describe to you. And one data point I have for that is the single most popular blog post I've ever written, read by like a lot of people, was how to teach constitutional law in a world where the justices just make stuff up. So when I teach cases and the students, the students give me the facts and the holding, and then I give them a little bit of leash, and then they go, wait a minute, Professor Segall, that makes no sense what the court said. That's wrong. That's demonstrably false. It doesn't make any sense at all. Do you know that here's something you will be able to relate to. And I can barely get through this without yelling. The Affordable Care Act and Medicaid, right? You know more about this than I do. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. What year was the Affordable Care Act passed?
2010.
And what year was it going to be effective?
2014.
2014. You're passing the class. And the Medicaid part of it, who was going to pay for it for the first 3 years?
The federal government is going to pay for over 90% of it, and states.
No, 100% the first 3 and then 90 after that.
Got it.
Okay. Now, in the decision striking down the Medicaid part of Obamacare,
yes,
Justice Roberts said that the federal government is not allowed to put retroactive conditions on the states. That's a direct quote. Retroactive conditions. You tell me a world. I just taught this the other night. My students went crazy. Tell me a world where the federal government says to the states in 2010, we're passing a law. It's not effective at all into 2014. Then you have no cost for 3 more years or 4, whatever it was. And that condition is called by the Supreme Court unconstitutionally retroactive. In that world, anything is possible. Anything is possible.
I understand. I think that's an interesting anecdote and way to make the point.
There's no opinion in that statement.
Right.
Those are all facts.
Right. Well, yeah.
No, they are. When it was passed, when it was effective.
Well, I don't understand what the word retroactive means legally.
What he was saying was the states were caught by surprise, so Medicaid is unconstitutional to some degree. They weren't caught by surprise. They had 7 years to plan.
Right. Well, maybe there's
I'm just saying.
Maybe there's a range of surprise on the spectrum. Now I'm bending over backwards to hear Roberts.
No, there's no range of surprise to the word retroactive. It's either retroactive or it's not.
And now, as the sun shines in on me, it's always also shining in on you. This is glorious. Yeah. All right, so let me pivot.
Wait, I want to finish this. Okay. I want to put a thing on the end.
Okay, put a thing on the end of it.
I am very sure Biden is going to win. I am very sure these legal challenges are not going to succeed. And the legal arguments that will be put forward are no more frivolous than other legal arguments the Supreme Court has accepted.
Got it. That's a very succinct way of wrapping up everything you said. And I'm going to say that you said that at the top of the interview in my recording, my opening, so that people don't lose their mind while you're making the arguments that you're only making to help us be enlightened on how things possibly could be, not that you believe them.
Yes.
Okay. How will Joe Biden govern is the next question. And that question, again, is a legal question based on the 3 branches of government, right? It's not.
No, I think
it's not stylistically. It's not politically. It's if the Senate is this makeup and the courts are this makeup. How does Joe Biden govern? And I will answer this question for you. He does not. Everything is done by executive order. His opening act is reversing a whole bunch of shit that Donald Trump did by executive order, as every president seemingly in the modern era does. How'd I do? First move.
B+.
First move is that. So
the reason why many of Trump's executive orders were wrapped up in the courts for years and are still being wrapped up in the courts, the reason for that had nothing to do, almost most of the time, with the substance of the executive order. What Trump didn't do was go through the right procedural hurdles to overturn prior executive orders and to do it legally. I think Biden, I hope and expect Biden to do things legally most of the time. But Pete, that's slow. That does not happen on day one. Cannot. Biden cannot come in on, to the extent there is a legal Trump executive order that affects people outside the government. Biden cannot just come in with a pen and cross it out. They have to go through notice and comment, which means they have to tell the world they're going to reverse it. They have to explain why they're going to reverse it. People get a right to object to their reversing it. That's if you do it legally. And I fully expect Biden to do it legally. And I think Biden should do it legally unless there is a pressing emergency need, in which case those rules don't apply. But most of the time, there's not going to be an emergency. And you can't just come in and undo everything. You can't. There are hoops.
Okay, well, the other thing that he's going to do, and this is important, but he is going to appoint people to run agencies and as cabinet secretaries who are actually qualified, and that's really important. They're not going to be the foxes in the hen house. They're not going to be the industry regulating the agency. They're going to actually be qualified people and who are going to appoint other qualified people, for example, scientists when dealing with science. That's a big thing.
So I have good news for the first time today. I have good news. I mean, it's all good news, but I mean, I have unequivocal good news. So some people were lamenting that McConnell and his minions might block cabinet appointments.
Just ignore my daughter walking in and handing me a sandwich that she made me. How lovely.
Are you really going to eat while we talk?
I might. You talk a lot. Go ahead with the McConnell point.
If I had to predict, I would say that the Senate is not going to obstruct Biden's executive branch appointees. Even if they had 52 or 53 senators, they're not going to do that because it is not. So someone said to me the other day, what does McConnell love more than anything? And I thought about it for a while, and my first answer was maybe judges, but the person said no, power.
Yeah, power. Power.
So he knows that if someone other than Trump starts making these acting appointments that don't require Senate confirmation,
right,
which Trump did his entire 4 years, that eventually dilutes the Senate's power tremendously, obviously. So I don't think they'll make Biden go through that hoop. Instead, they will confirm most of his people. I do not see a legal battle there. Now, if he wants to appoint AOC to be Secretary of HHS, no, she's not getting through. But generally speaking, he'll get to appoint whoever he wants.
I wish she would get through. I wish she were president.
Yeah. One thing that that Biden does have to do, and this gets complicated mechanically.
Mm-hmm.
This is an untold story, except for by Sarah Posner, who you had on your podcast a while back.
Yeah, she's great.
What Trump showed a book called Unholy about the evangelicals. What Trump did is he put most of HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, most of the people at the top of that had evangelical ties and connections. Those people need to be booted out of Washington unceremoniously as quickly as possible. And I hope Biden does that on day one. Goodbye and don't come back.
What else do you think you want to say about how Biden will govern given the circumstances? Again, we're, I guess, having this conversation with the idea that the Senate, which it's possible and will fight to win in your state of Georgia. But our argument is, I think, based on the idea that they maintain the majority by what?
By at least one vote, 51-49.
Yeah.
Well, now, so I do think what's interesting about that, this may be a tangent, but I want to say it, is people like Susan Collins, when Biden is the president, she might actually do more than be concerned. Like she might, on close votes, side with the Democrats. I think that's possible. So that's people. I think there are some Senate Republicans who
maybe she and Lisa Murkowski will change parties.
Yeah, wouldn't that be fun? It's funny. The next month in Georgia is going to be something, isn't it? I mean,
there's going to be more money spent and more attention on that.
Can I just say also that this is the first time I've said it this way publicly. I tweeted things like this in 2020. I'm going to get emotional. So Sorry. John Lewis is somebody we should all, and we all do, respect, what he went through, what he did, what he accomplished with his life. And his leaving us, followed by Stacey Abrams, who is a friend, not a friend. I take that. She's someone I know a little bit. Stacey Abrams is an American hero. She made a lot of this possible. She's going to carry John Lewis's mantle forward. And I'm now talking in my unofficial, non-Georgia State capacity. I truly hope she's the first female black governor in America, I think, but certainly of a southern state. And we should not lose sight of that in all of this. Without her, Georgia is not close. It is, whether he wins Georgia or not, without her, Georgia is not close. And she might have changed the politics of Georgia and thus the country. If you look at
the only thing, I just want to interrupt for just a moment, because I think what you said is super important. I'm glad you said it, and the way you said it. But I just want to add one thing. A lot of times we look at individuals and say, without so-and-so. But I would just like to argue, without the infrastructure and support, the organizations that she worked with, there were hundreds of people that followed her and worked with her and have made her initiatives and her goals possible. And I just want to take a moment to so people understand that, because that's what getting involved matters. One person often gets a lot of credit for being an inspiring and important leader, as Stacey Abrams rightfully has, but hundreds and maybe thousands of people have followed in that lead and done countless hours of work. And I want to just I just want to give those nameless people in this conversation credit.
Totally fair. Their hard work cannot be emphasized. And Pete, one of my first jobs at Georgia State Law School administratively was, they gave this to the junior person, was we had to do a strategic plan. And they, the most awful task ever. And they said, call 20 other deans of law schools and ask them how they did their strategic planning. Mm-hmm. And so I did that back in this is before email was even such a thing as today. So I had 20 conversations with really smart lawyers all over the country. When law school does strategic planning, tell me the most important things and the most important pitfalls, all that stuff. I would say of those 20 or 22 people, about 6 or 7, really, I respected what they said. And what they said was, unless you have a strong leader, forget trying to make change, which is not to say when you have a strong leader, you don't need all the people working hard to implement the change.
Well, I think that's interesting. I think that the Black Lives Matter movement has had strong leaders in many local arenas, but several of them. And not just one, but it has been a kind of without a national leader.
The voter registration work that Stacey Abrams did in Georgia was her energy and ideas. Yeah. And I have to say, Pete, you know me, I'm not religious, but I am karma-ish, whatever that means.
Yeah, no, I think it matters. It's energy. It's human nature.
And I think losing John Lewis and gaining Stacey Abrams at the same time is something that was supposed to happen.
All right, let me end it there. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, there goes Eric Segall. Sorry if I sounded agitated or combative. It wasn't at all personal. I was just I think at one point I got frustrated with the point he was trying to make, but he is like one of my best friends, and so the way that I talk to him is not the way that I would talk to most guests, obviously. So sorry if that made you feel way uncomfortable. That's how we talk to each other. And so I'm still going to reach out to him and say, I was listening to that interview and I didn't mean to be annoying and sound like an arrogant prick. Anyway, so moving forward, next on the show, I've got the great Emily Atkin. Emily Atkin is such an awesome human being and journalist. Heated.world is her newsletter. You can subscribe to it at heated.world, and every day it comes in your inbox, and it's all about climate. And Emily is a great reporter whose mentor was Wayne Barrett, who's one of the most respected investigative journalists ever. And Emily and her newsletter are so important. They really are. This is the most important issue, and Emily is one of the best reporters, and it's independent, and it's not corporate, and the way that she talks, the way that she writes, and the way that she works is super original and refreshing, and I just love reading it, and I love talking to her, and it's been a long time since we spoke. We caught up, and I thought this is one of many of the issues that we need to talk about, and one of the top issues, obviously. And so here's my conversation with Heated.World's Emily Atkin. All right, I have one of my all-time favorite guests. It's been far too long since we spoke here on the podcast, or really at all, but I haven't stopped following her on Twitter and reading her newsletter every day. I'm very glad to have Emily Atkin back on the show. Thank you very much for joining me. First show post-Biden official win. To have you is great.
My first media appearance anywhere, actually, post-Biden official win.
Well, you did. You hosted a whole hangout on election night, so I guess that wasn't post, but that was pretty cool for people if they want to go watch it. What did you do?
Yeah, Eric Holthouse, who also writes a climate newsletter called The Phoenix. Yep. He and I just decided we didn't really know what to do on election night, so we decided to host a live stream, and we got like 20. I think the end count was like 26. Climate activists, journalists, people running for office on like a climate platform to come join us. It was a long climate-filled evening.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think you made a point, though, that the fact that people were available kind of sucks because they weren't being booked by other media outlets because it wasn't an issue that most media outlets were necessarily concerned with, at least on election night. Is that what you mean?
Right. Like, we didn't think that all of these people that we were reaching out to were going to say yes. I think what Eric said on the live stream was that it's the highest response rate he's ever gotten, sending out email inquiries for a story or something like that. So people were just chilling on election night. I think people were probably anxious, also looking for something to do. And so I was happy that we were able to provide somewhat of a space for that.
So you have a really good post. I mean, I obviously, this is the issue that I care the most about, and it's one that has not gotten nearly as much attention because in an election year, we're thinking so much about the campaigns, and obviously the pandemic has dominated so much, and dwindling democracy concerns and so on. But I don't know if it's your most recent newsletter, Climate Reflections on the Election, is really interesting. Can you just kind of take me back over the kind of the past year and how your reporting has been received and how you've been trying to break through given an election year and the pandemic at the same time? How has climate reporting been heard, seen, received?
It's sort of interesting because I've felt like over the last year in reporting on this election and reporting on the coronavirus and then also reporting on the climate crisis and then doing those two other types of reporting, coronavirus and election reporting from a climate lens, it's like I almost feel like I'm explaining and justifying my profession while I'm doing it, while I'm actually doing the profession. Yeah. Like so much of climate reporting today is actually explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it, because it's almost, it's an evolving and new field. I understand more about it every year that I do it. And I think it's so important to communicate why you're doing what you're doing. We've really seen the information landscape change over the last year, not only with seeing more climate change content, but really seeing journalists start to approach it differently and start to understand that it's not only an interesting story to tell, but one that viewers and readers want to be told. People are very interested in, and it just requires understanding that climate change really affects and grows out of everything. I mean, every story is a climate change story. So we've started to see the narrative that, climate change is this niche topic, shift in the last year, but it just hasn't shifted as swiftly as I think we need it to in order to be able to effectively tackle climate change. Yeah. So
What are some of the kind of the connections and the overlaps and the narratives between the pandemic and climate?
Oh, well, I mean, with coronavirus and climate change, it's like I could not have dreamed up a better metaphor for climate change. I mean, really just like a global crisis that threatens millions of lives and threatens to devastate the economy. But we just need to listen to scientists, like take the tough advice scientists are giving us in order to prevent more damage later. But we refuse to take that advice, and we deny that advice, and we make whatever excuse we can to say that advice is a hoax for some reason, or coronavirus is a hoax. I mean, climate change is very much coronavirus just on steroids, because climate change worsens pandemics, right? But then you also have the extreme weather effects of climate change. You have the effects of climate change on the healthcare system. You have the effects of climate change on immigration and global conflict. I mean, if you think a pandemic is bad, if you think the fact that we don't listen to scientists about a pandemic, you think that's bad. I mean, we don't listen to scientists about climate change either, and that's way worse. So it really gives us, what it's done is it's really given, I think, for me, a climate reporter, a good rhetorical tool to tell other reporters, like, would you cover coronavirus this way? Would you cover this global threat this way? So why are you covering climate change this way? It has given a good comparison, at least, if I'm looking for silver linings in the pandemic here.
Yeah. I mean, what about just the idea that the solution, when it comes to the pandemic, the argument is, we can't shut anything down because it'll destroy the economy. People make a similar argument about climate. To solve climate, you're going to destroy the economy, all these things that you want to do. I mean, there's also, I think, that economic argument that's also not effective. I mean, it's not an either or. It doesn't make any sense if you think about economics from a more holistic point of view, or any point of view, really, I guess.
I mean, the pandemic illustrates our continued inability to think in the long-term economic interest of the country, right? We can only think in these very short-term economic cycles. I think that is why is a question that could be answered in many ways. I think it's interesting that, I think that it's sort of an effect of just our modern system of capitalism, where we measure growth in terms of quarters and not in terms of generations or long term. We just, our brains in this system are not wired to think about long term economic benefit, and they're certainly not wired to think of human life and quality of human life as an economic factor. There's a reason why there's a large portion of the country that's far more concerned about property damage than they are about Black lives when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement. That's a manifestation of the same phenomenon we see with climate change, where people just value the monetary thing in front of them more than the human life next to them.
What about the role that climate voters and donors played in the campaign, Emily? You read about that in a recent issue of your newsletter as well. How important were they? And how do you classify, I guess, climate voters and donors too?
Well, it's interesting because I wrote about that. I wrote about the role that climate voters and climate donors played right after the election, just sort of anecdotally speculating that I think that they played probably a big role in helping turn people out, especially young people out this year, and in providing an influx of money for the Biden campaign. And I've actually done a bit more reporting on that, on both of those questions, which I'll have in my newsletter on Monday.
You've got receipts, you've got data.
I do. I have some data and I have some receipts. So I'm looking forward to expanding on that a little more. But what, basically the gist is that, people who raised money specifically from their position as either a clean energy CEO or as a climate motivated donor, we see big increases in that this cycle over last cycle. in the tens of millions of dollars. And then we saw big turnout efforts in some of the swing states that went for Biden among environmental voters. The Environmental Voter Project was canvassing and getting people out to vote in all of those swing states and gave me some numbers, which I'll be sharing in the newsletter. And the Environmental Voter Project doesn't tell people who to vote for. It's nonpartisan, but I think it's pretty safe to say that if you're going to the polls as a climate motivated voter, you're not voting for Donald Trump.
Yeah, fair to say. As I was winterizing my lawn today, I listened to a bunch of the mainstream Sunday shows and the cables and the ABCs and the CBSs, et cetera. And I heard both Mitt Romney, who's a Republican senator, of course, from Utah, and Joe Manchin, who is technically a Democrat, but he's in West Virginia, say something similar, criticizing the Green New Deal. I saw that you tweeted this clip, and I wonder let me see if I can play it for you to hear and respond.
But I want to make sure that we conservatives keep on fighting to make sure that we don't have a Green New Deal. We don't get rid of gas and coal and oil. That we don't have a Medicare for all plan put in place, that we don't raise taxes on American enterprise.
All right. So just the important part there, we don't have a Green New Deal. We don't get rid of coal, he said, gas and oil. And Joe Manchin said something very similar. What is the kind of the brand right now with Green New Deal? It was surprising to see, I guess, even Mitt Romney say, that we can't have that. I'll fight against that. And to preserve coal. Like, what is public opinion on these things right now? Where are we at on the most important issue, policy solution to the most existential issue of our time?
I mean, it doesn't even matter. I mean, not to mention that the Green New Deal is popular, and not to mention that, like, climate policies and phasing out fossil fuels and investing more in renewable energy is popular. It's all popular. What's the most striking thing to me about that clip is that Mitt Romney can very easily go on television and say, my priority is to make sure we don't get rid of fossil fuels, and not have everyone around him be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Your priority is to make sure a bunch of people keep dying. We still haven't reached a point in our discourse where it's understood that if you're not for phasing out and phasing away from fossil fuels, you are for the death of millions of people, and you are for the collapse of the American economy, because there is no credible study that says that the economy is going to be fine if we keep burning fossil fuels. And there's no credible study that says millions of people aren't going to die if we don't phase out fossil fuels. I mean, the climate literature is very clear, but yet in our political space, it's still fine to just say, I would like to preserve the fossil fuel economy. And it says far more about all of us than it says about just Mitt Romney. Although I would say, I would also add that all the people hoping for some level of bipartisan climate policy, this is your most Democratic friendly Republican senator. So get ready. Yeah,
it's a really stark and important point to make. So Joe Biden campaigned a lot on climate, and he talked about it a lot. Maybe not enough, who decides such things? But he's talked a lot about certain policies. I think you've even written that he's had the most progressive platform when it comes to environmental issues that we've ever seen a presidential candidate. So he's, where do you think that he can start? I mean, first and foremost, I think getting back into the Paris Climate Treaty. What does that mean? How is it done? And how important is that to start?
Well, getting back into the Paris Climate Accord is an important symbolic move to the rest of the world that we're back. We're working on this again. It'll put us at least finally be able to actually have a meaningful place in international discussions about how to solve this problem, because we've been taking a back seat in the leadership of how to solve the climate crisis in the last 4 years, which who knows how that's going to affect us moving forward. But it's relatively easy for Biden to just rejoin that day one. I think he's already started drafting up that executive order. I think I read today. what I'm thinking about right now mostly is that there's a difference between a campaign and an administration. Right. I think that Biden clearly won a lot of donors and won a lot of support from people who were supportive of his very progressive climate plan, but whether or not that he's actually going to pursue an implementation of anything resembling that plan, I think we're going to see in the next coming weeks as he starts to name his transition team and his cabinet officials. That's really the first sign of whether or not you're going to hold true to your promises. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult if the Senate stays Republican for him to pass any major climate legislation, but it's not a foregone conclusion that the Senate will be Republican at this point.
But the Senate matters a great deal on any piece of legislation, major or not, and whether you call it a Green Deal, New Deal, or anything less comprehensive, you have to get it through a Senate that could be run by Republicans and Mitch McConnell, and that's going to be
and even if it is run by Democrats, you still have Joe Manchin in there.
Yeah,
it's not like he's not going to be there.
Right, absolutely. West Virginia, of course, is a coal state. The Trump promised to bring coal back. Did coal come back, Emily?
Coal did even worse than it was before Trump. And it's very sad to me. That's one of the saddest stories of this whole. Why? It's always been one of the saddest. Well, because I've done reporting in coal country, and the people whose jobs and whose lives have been supported by the coal industry, those are real people who have been told by their very rich bosses and very rich politicians that they're going to save their industry, and have been lied to knowingly by people like Trump, by people like Bob Murray, who recently passed away, the CEO of Moye Energy, that they're going to save their jobs, and that all you need to do is donate to this candidate, put your faith in this administration, and your livelihood will be saved. And these people, believed them, and they didn't go to there's evidence that lots of coal workers would reject other job training programs because they fully believe that their industry is coming back, because they're being lied to by people who knew full well this whole time that they weren't going to save this industry. So that's why I think it's sad. It's not because, I don't gloat or feel happy over the death of coal when the death of coal happened at the expense of a lot of people. The death of coal didn't need to be this painful for people.
Right.
We saw this coming, and we see this coming with oil and gas too. We see it coming with fracking. It's one of the most maddening things about this whole entire election is how fracking has been painted as some economic pariah when actually it's not doing well. And if we keep investing in these jobs and pretending and lying that this is an industry that's going to be booming for years to come, a lot of people are going to be left jobless and without that security blanket and just wondering, why is this happening? I thought I was supposed to be fine. We need to stop lying to people.
Why are they doing so badly? Why are coal and oil and gas and fracking doing poorly? Is it because renewables are competitive at price wise?
Yeah, renewables are becoming competitive. There's a lot of different factors on why fracking isn't doing very well. We're overproducing, we're over supplying to meet our demand, which everyone thinks it's absolutely impossible that we could meet our demand with 100% renewable energy. It's not that far-fetched of an idea. We have a little ways to go, but it can obviously happen because you've seen there's a reason that coal declined. Coal declined because of natural gas. Fracking is declining because of the rise of renewables and some other market factors. But it's, things are shifting. It's why you see these big investment firms being we're not going to invest in fossil fuels anymore because that's kind of over.
Right. Well, there's a whole movement to get them not to invest in fossil fuels as well. There's kind of a moral consciousness that is starting to rise and starting to affect a whole bunch of different companies and advertisers. One time I recently reached out to you to talk about how a podcast that I like to listen to, ABC's Start Here, the host, Brad Milkey, is doing live reads for Shell Oil. And I was like, what the hell's that all about? I mean, who's doing that? Who's doing a live read, putting their own voice to an oil company? But there's a lot that goes behind that, and you've covered that a lot at Heated in terms of what the fossil fuel companies, how they are investing, how they are advertising, and how they are adapting. What would you say about that?
Everyone just needs to know that there's a difference between an advertisement for a product and an advertisement for an idea. Like when you turn on the TV and you see an advertisement for toilet paper, you're like, yes, Charmin is trying to sell me toilet paper. This makes total sense. When you turn on your podcast or the TV and you see an ad for Shell Oil, and it's just like, Shell Oil is really concerned about climate change. Learn more about how we're investing in renewable energy. It's like they're not actually, like, take a step back and be like, why are they? That's not a product. That's not toilet paper. That's not they're trying to sell me gas. They're trying to sell me the idea that they take climate change seriously. Why would they be doing that? They're doing that because they don't want to be held responsible for the deadly consequences of lying to the public about climate change for 50 years and of profiting from a product that is destroying the planet and killing people. So it's the same as when a tobacco company advertises that cigarettes totally don't kill people, and we're like really investing in lung cancer research. And I think too many media personalities just don't see the difference between that and like Purple Mattress is a great mattress. And like Shell Oil is totally not killing people. They like think it's the same for some reason. Yeah. It's not. It's not even. I mean, what's worse, Shell Oil or My Pillow? Do you think for the planet? No, that's a tough one. Know, but you might not know this because I'm not sure. I probably should have told you this because I have a source. Do you know what's in the My Pillow? It's filled with pieces of coal. Shut up. Yeah, I have one. I had to do a live read for one years ago. It's just filled with chunks of coal. It's very uncomfortable. So I think we talk a lot about legislation, obviously, and policy solutions and so on, but I think it's really important, and you've done a great job at Heated covering the appointments, the actual personnel in the federal government as a result of Trump. And everybody thinks about EPA, and we should talk about EPA, but I mean, I've got friends at Fish and Wildlife, at Interior, and you can talk about the parks. You could talk about any number of, really, you could tie any agency to climate and the environment if you wanted to. But how important are the people that run these agencies, the actual political appointees of the president of the United States? Give us some examples of some of the people that Trump appointed and help me understand why it will change when they leave and go back to their jobs working in the actual industries that they were supposed to be regulating in the federal government. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the details of the federal bureaucracy are certainly not ones that most people in their day-to-day lives are thinking about or familiar with, but we have huge agencies that govern government science and govern the government's administration of environmental laws and all that kind of stuff. And thousands upon thousands of people are employed at those agencies, but only basically the leadership change with every administration, because basically these political appointees, they are the boss. They're in charge of the direction in which the agency is going and the work that all these career employees are doing who don't change from administration to administration. So I think what you're asking is like, who are these people that Trump has appointed? It's like, former coal lobbyist Andrew Wheeler is at the head of the EPA. Basically, every political appointee at the EPA is some sort of protege from Senator Jim Inhofe's office. And Jim Inhofe is, as you guys may know, the senator who brought the snowball to the Senate floor to be like, look how cold it is outside, you idiots. He's like a 95-year-old fool. He's from, Oklahoma. From Oklahoma, oil and gas producing state. We've seen industry lobbyists all over Interior, which is the agency that regulates, our public land. And that's important because There's a lot of drilling and logging and all this stuff taking place on public land now under Trump. And then we have our science-based agencies too, where all of our like climate and atmospheric research is done. NASA and NOAA in particular. NASA, everybody knows, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I think I'm saying that right.
Yeah, they have a guy. Who is this guy? You just had an issue about, what is it, Ryan Moye or whatever? Like
Ryan Moye.
Moye. Yeah. Great. You had a great newsletter on it. NOAA's new top scientist deletes evidence of his climate views. He purged his Twitter account of tweets insulting climate scientists, journalists, and activists before taking the position of a scientist here at NOAA. You have this great deep dive into that. Super important, which is why the work you're doing is super important, which is why everybody should pay to subscribe to Emily's work. But, I mean, things like this where other people aren't covering them, and you in the meantime, did like a forensic file on this asshole.
Well, he brought it on himself.
Yeah, well, no,
I was going to say he brought this on himself. He has been a thorn in the side of every climate person on Twitter for the last 5 years. I mean, he's just been like this pretending to be serious he's good at meteorology. He's absolutely great at it. Absolutely really good at providing context to extreme weather events that are happening. But to put it frankly, he's a climate change denier. And, he's just been kind of a jerk on Twitter for the last 5 years. So when I heard he was about to get picked to be the chief scientist at NOAA, which is our top environmental science agency, and usually very immune to political considerations, I just was like, I'm going to go screenshot his tweets because I bet he's going to delete all of them before he gets actually appointed. And then he did delete all of them because you can't be the chief scientist at NOAA if you've spent the last, honestly, since 2011, my tweets go back. If you spent the last almost 10 years basically saying all climate scientists are, they don't shower or use toothbrushes, and all climate journalists are Democrats, and we shouldn't be researching climate change after an extreme weather event because they're not connected. I mean, it's a lot of that kind of stuff. Very partisan, very name-cally. There's honestly more. There's more that I haven't even published. Like, the old blogs of his.
But I mean, the point I'm getting at is these are the people that are currently in the federal government, and to me, that has been the worst horror of the Trump administration is that every agency at every level of government that he has been able to appoint people to, he has appointed not only like the worst people, like the most cartoon villainish people that we would never imagine being in charge, like Betsy DeVos at education, like the enemies of that department of the federal government having responsibility, as I'm talking to you in this case about climate, about energy, and they put people in charge that want to destroy it. It's been so, I think that's been the hardest thing for me to watch happen, is seeing these people really try to do what Steve Bannon's whole agenda was to destroy the administrative state.
Well, and again, and most people it's a sad story to me in many ways, but one thing we don't think about a lot is those career employees of these agencies who go into these mostly thankless government jobs with the idea that they're doing it to help people, and they're doing it because they believe in public service and they believe somewhat in government. It's a myth of Parks and Recreation, that the TV show, that there's just, some guy in charge sitting there who's generally just wants to dismantle the government. That's the Ron Swanson, that only works there because he would like it to not exist anymore.
Yeah.
There's a reason that's like a parody character.
Yeah.
It's because generally that person does not exist.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody that works in government, and obviously, I don't want to go down that road about categorizing. Everybody's very different, obviously, but I mean, there's a lot of motivation to do good things. Let's just say. I mean, that's
what I mean to say is that these appointments can be very demoralizing for a lot of people, and right. I'm saying that from reporting that I've done and that we've seen. Right, is that people go to work for the EPA, to go to work for NOAA, to go to the Park Service, to go to the Interior, because in some way they believe in the idea of protecting public lands, protecting the environment, protecting the integrity of science, and then to put people in charge who are spent their careers in the absolute antithesis to that idea. It is a lot of very depressed people in Washington, D.C. is what I'll say.
I think the most interesting thing to me, or most maddening thing to me, was just thinking about that illustrates this. Is Scott Pruitt was the first EPA administrator for Donald Trump, and his job before that was suing the EPA. He sued the EPA. It wasn't his job, but he sued the EPA many times, and then he ran the EPA. I mean, just imagine. That's basically, unfortunately, I think that's always what happens with Republican presidents. But this was way worse than ever before.
You have a climate science denier as the chief scientist of your climate science agency?
It's crazy. It's terrifying. And so the final, getting back to the original question, how much does that change in a Biden-Harris administration?
It flips it on its head. There's not going to be a coal lobbyist at the head of the EPA under Biden. There's not going to be climate deniers at the head of NOAA under Biden. Now, does that mean his picks are going to be awesome and great and everyone's going to celebrate them? Absolutely not. I'm looking so forward to seeing who he picks for these administrative roles, because I bet some of them are going to have some conflicts of interest for sure. And I'm sure there's going to be great, in-depth, nuanced pros and cons list we can make about these choices. But what I'm most looking forward to is that it's not just going to be like, oh, you nominated what? Like, it's like nominating a gummy bear. So like, you know, you're like, you nominated a gummy bear to lead like the FDA.
Yeah.
Great.
I don't know if you heard this, but apparently at one point during the pandemic, Trump wanted to nominate an actual cigarette to lead HHS.
Yeah, this is exactly. Yeah.
But apparently the cigarette said that he wanted to spend more time with his family. All right. So it's been a little over a year since you started your newsletter. So my final question to you is, what would you say about it? How has this experience been? You left a really respected news outlet, The New Republic. You're a very respected journalist in the world of respected journalists. And I know you've been working your tail off, just like I have been, to put something out pretty much every day that you can. And I want everybody to support. I've been supporting it from the beginning, and it's one of the few that I do. And I absolutely love the work you're doing. But what would you say about what you've learned and what heated has become in the last year, and what you have planned for this year, Emily?
In the most grossly earnest way possible, the newsletter has taught me the power of pursuing something that you believe in, even if people don't understand it at first. I mean, I definitely had my share of skeptics when I said I wanted to quit my stable magazine job at the New Republic to start an email newsletter about climate change. I know a lot of journalists are starting newsletters now, but a little over a year ago, that was not the case. But I just felt like at the time, you know, I felt like time was running out to be able to do really meaningful, effective, aggressive climate coverage in my voice, the way I really wanted to do it. And so I did it. And I've seen, I'm not saying it's just because of me. It certainly is not. But like, I've seen such a change in how mainstream media and mainstream thinkers think about climate change. And I think it's been because of a sea of very courageous people who just are like, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and do what I believe in here and say what I think. So the newsletter has really taught me the power of independent voices. I always say that one of my biggest fears leaving the New Republic was that without the heft of an institution behind me, I would lose my power to influence and my power to be heard. And I would have to claw my way to have impactful journalism, and it's been exactly the opposite.
But what about not having an editor and getting things wrong? You are an excellent, respected journalist who does everything she can to get it right. Is it harder to not have like a team of people fact checking? I've seen you, that's why I trust your reporting, because you print corrections and retractions anytime there's an error in your reporting. I find your reporting at Heated, which is your own basically media outlet newsletter, to be as respected and as excellent as journalism at mainstream media sources and big companies. But how do you do that without an editor?
I mean, I would say the biggest issue is not only typos and factual errors, but also just the accountability that an editor provides you to tell you when you should stop tweeting and write a story, to really push you. I think that that's the biggest challenge for me. But yes, errors happen. They happen with or without an editor. I've been fortunate enough to be in this profession long enough where I know how to try to take as many precautions as I can to avoid factual errors, but also I'm never going to be taken seriously if I don't take my own errors seriously. That's why you see the corrections that I print all the time. And it becomes even that much more important for me to be extremely transparent so that everybody knows the standards that I'm trying to hold myself to. And at the same time, there's also, I think, a little more understanding and from my audience, just because they know it's just me.
Yeah.
So
yep, for sure. I hear that too from my audience, and I love that about reading your newsletter as well. And you put so much of your own flair into it, and your own kind of, I think, ferocity and lack of patience for bullshit. And I love that about you. Like, your personality is in the journalism and in the writing and in the work always, and your passion comes through. Congratulations on a year. I'm so glad to talk to you again, and I hope that we can talk more in 2021 as you hold hopefully the Biden administration. Hopefully the Biden administration, right? It'll be a Biden administration. We'll make it there, right? Hopefully holding them to account as well. Thank you.
I cannot wait. Thank you for having me, and good year for you too.
Yes. It's been fun to watch each other grow, and looking forward to seeing what's next. Thanks, Emily. Heated.world, everybody. Check it out right now and go get a paid subscription and join up to support Emily's awesome journalism. All right, Emily Atkin, Heated.world. So good. Very much enjoy the opportunity to discuss that issue and her journalism around it with her. Eric Segall, of course, thank you for joining me today on the podcast. Sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't already, and know that you're not alone. There's always a hang happening in the Discord platforms. Sign up and you'll get access to that as well. Okay, season 2 is off and running. Year 2, season 2, episode 226. Tell me who you want to hear, what you want me to talk about. I'll reach out to my amazing network of people, and I will get the best experts on, and we will have this conversation and learn more each and every day, and be as positive as we can about it, growing together each and every day as well. I love you. You're not alone. I'll talk to you tomorrow.